Hi, Emily. Welcome to the show. It is so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am too. I was telling you earlier that I feel like just from a health standpoint, this is such a important topic and people are not talking about it enough. And so I think like when we're talking about health and wellness and well-being, to skip over this conversation, I think is kind of just a mistake. If I'm completely honest with you, wouldn't you
Yeah.
agree?
Yeah. And it's such a universal problem. It affects the young, the old, the middle aged, the working, the non working. It's universal, it's global. So it's the elephant in the room, literally.
It really is. It really is. And I feel like, it really is screen time and just technology in general. It is a tough topic because I think it's demonized in a lot of ways and for good reason, for good
Yeah.
reason, because there's a lot going on. But also, the screens and technology in general can be really useful. So,
Right.
to find balance in it all is important, but it's also so hard. And when we're talking about families and children in particular, I think that a lot of people are struggling. So I am so excited and so happy that we're going to be having this because I think that this conversation is going to help a lot of listeners here.
Great. Let's dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So, just to give people a little bit of a background, tell us a little bit about how you got into this sort of niche, if I'm honest, because really
Yeah.
you were a teacher and you sort of like went, left, so to speak, like in the best way. And now you're in this space where you've written this book and you're helping families and
Yep.
children with just screen time and yeah, kind of just how to prioritize balance and give screen time strategies in a really practical way. So give us a little bit of background on you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I I had an analog childhood, and that's something I always like to talk about because I feel like we are the last generation, though I'm 45, those in my age bracket who will remember a childhood that was free of the internet and free of digital tech for the most part. I mean, computer lab in school was just one of those newer things. And what I saw as a teacher, so I started teaching middle school English in 2003, and I left the classroom in 2015. So over this 12-year span, I witnessed both the rise of social media outside of the school. So that was like Facebook and MySpace and Facebook initially. And then also simultaneously, as a teacher, the expectation that I used digital tech and tech tools in the classroom, initially for grading and lesson planning, but slowly to being like uploading homework and, putting assignments there and resources. And what I realized was I couldn't ignore the outside of the classroom conversation that was happening because I was working with middle schoolers and middle school is all about social drama and nothing has changed. That is still the case. I have a middle schooler. That's normal. And I always want to reassure parents who are like, why all the drama? The drama is normal. What's not normal is giving kids unlimited access to the internet 24/7 on which to magnify these dramatic issues. And so what I realized was that all that drama was spilling over into the classroom, and I'd be hearing about things that happened online. And so had an I hate Megan Facebook group, and they were all piling on. And this is in like 2012, 2013. And at first I did the like adult, well, you need to be nice online and you shouldn't say things that you wouldn't say in person. And then the kids started saying, yeah, but it's our parents. Our parents are texting and driving. Our parents are playing Candy Crush and scrolling through Facebook too. And I had this aha moment of like, oh, this isn't a kid problem. This is a parent and adult problem that is affecting children. And so I'm always approaching this without judgment because I say it's not your fault, parents.
Mm.
A lot of people want to say, just take it away. Don't give it to them in the first place. So much easier said than done, first of all. But it's our responsibility. So we're not off the hook. We have to be informed about it. We have to do certain things. And I have lots of tools and tips. But this isn't a kid problem, it's an adult problem.
Yeah. No, it really is. And we were chatting about this a little bit off air and I was saying, I don't have children as of today. And for a lot of my listeners know that, but but it's still a problem. It's still a
Yeah.
problem for us. And so I can't even imagine, for families it must be so difficult because we are also very much like in not I don't want to say invested, but we're tied to these devices.
Totally.
And so it's becomes this thing where it's just like life is just in the palm of your hand, literally.
Yeah.
But then you have these little ones that are
Yeah.
watching
Yes.
and they are really looking and absorbing everything that's going on. And so
Yeah.
it becomes just like a pattern that starts to
Right.
unfold, you know? So I can
Right.
understand how it, and it's like how to find the balance in that is so challenging.
Right, right. And I people have pointed out rightfully that the pandemic added fuel to the fire for all of us. Like we were home, we were less socializing, we were not interacting in real people in real world. Kids were online for school, we were online for work. But I also want to remind people that this was a growing concern prior. And so it was like sometimes we should hold the pandemic accountable for the accelerative is that a word, the
It is.
acceleration of the tech use, but it was there before. And so I think on the one hand it's good, it did pull back the curtain a little bit. Certainly parents who watched kids online and saw what they were doing in online school, I think we all were like, wow, we're doing a lot more on time online stuff than we did prior. And what's hard is getting away from that. It's the aftermath, like pulling back. So I'll have parents tell me all the time, like, we had it all figured out. And then, pandemic life happened and we just can't pull it back. And what we have to remember is that was like 3 years of development. And in a child's life, I mean, if you're talking about a 12-year-old, that's what, 25% of their life. And so that is a very big impact. And it's not going to be the same coming back. The solutions or the way we address it are going to have to be different because their development's changed as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes so much sense. Can we start from just like the I don't
Yeah.
want to say the beginning, but can we start and just sort of go over why in your opinion, and I think I know there's a lot of like science behind this, but
Yeah.
just to kind of like set the stage a little bit, why are these devices so addicting? Because,
Yeah.
you know, clearly it's an issue with most of us, you know, and I'm raising my own hand here, but whether it's a child or an adult, like what is going on and what makes us so tied to them?
That's a great question. One of the things I hear all the time is I watch TV, I played video games when I was a kid, and I turned out fine. And I mean, even the other day, I saw it in a comment on a post, and it's like, yeah, but it's totally different. And the way in which it's different is something that we really do need to understand. And it's because of this concept of persuasive design, right? And I definitely get lumped into the category of, oh, you're just freaking out about new technologies and you're a Luddite and all this stuff. And I will be the first to say, like, my whole premise is I'm not anti-tech, I'm tech intentional, right? But the difference here is that it's not that technology is bad, is that it is the way it is being deployed to hook and hold our attention is manipulative. It is deceptive. It is persuasive. And so when we are engaging in these products, and any adult over 30 can say, oh, yep, I've had this experience where I was looking at my email, nothing was there. I closed it, I immediately reopened it. Or I was scrolling through Instagram and I thought I'd do it for 2 minutes and it was 20 minutes. Or I was watching Netflix and was just going to do one more episode, 5 episodes later. And one interesting note about Netflix and all of these streaming platforms used to be you had to click play next episode, right? So here's one very subtle change. Now it auto plays. That tiny subtle change is an element of persuasive design. It's intended to make us stay on longer. And it really is a simple reason. It's because the way in which tech companies make money is on advertising. And in order to sell more advertising or get more advertising dollars, they have to have us engage with the product longer. We need to have our eyeballs on the screen longer. So it is in direct contradiction to healthy brain development, healthy relationships, emotional and social skills. And so when we talk about this for adults, all of us can say, oh, yeah, I've been there, done that. Whoops, I've totally gotten sucked in. But children's brains are not small adult brains. They are fundamentally different. And so when we say kids, it's what kids do these days, or this is like what I did when I was a kid, not at all. And so I think we have to dispel that myth right off the bat. It is not the same as when we were kids. That doesn't mean, again, that there aren't some cool applications that we can use or neat uses of technology. And I am all for those very intentional, developmentally in alignment, even fun. It doesn't always have to be educational. There are fun things, but it is not at the expense of all the other important skill building that has to happen first in order to get the brains where they need to be. Because that front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, isn't fully developed until we are in our 20s or even 30 years old, which is mind boggling. Like, think about all of these young adults who do what we might term stupid or why didn't you think about this, the consequence? Because that front part of the brain is impulse control, emotion regulation, planning, right? All of those skills that make us functional human beings, we have to give time for those to develop. And screen time and social media and excessive amounts of those directly interferes with that development. So that
Gosh,
was a
that is
long
so
answer.
good.
But
No,
yes.
that's so good. That's so
Yeah.
good. And I think it's important for people and parents to understand because, just coming from just an emotional standpoint, it's like sometimes
Yeah.
you might just want to wring your kid's neck and say, no,
Totally.
don't you get it? Like, don't you get that this is not healthy for you? But
Mhm.
they're not looking at it the same lens as
Right.
an adult because they're, again,
Right.
operating off of a different system. So I think that's a really
Yes.
important point. Yeah.
And what I always tell parents too, and this is true again for all of us, is we're not fighting our child. We are fighting a hijacked neural pathway. We are fighting dopamine. And there is I always say it's not a fair fight because it's not that your sweet, wonderful child is all of a sudden a monster. It's literally the hormones, all that good feeling is saying, keep playing, keep playing. This feels good. I'm getting validation in the form of likes and wins and tokens and coins and points. And so when we interrupt that, if we go to take away an iPad or tell them to get off a game, we're interrupting that dopamine. And again, you're never going to win. And so it's part of the problem. Like I hear this all the time is like, there's nothing else that will motivate my kids, right? Like it's the screen or nothing. And so one of the things I tell parents all the time is we have to make sure there are other things in their life that, I mean, it won't ever compete, but we don't want it to become that the screen is the only thing that motivates behavior because we're only setting them up for a future where that's going to be the thing that motivates them. And what future employee is going to be like, sure, I'll reward my employees with screen based, right? Like, that's not what we want. We don't
Right.
want that. So we have to kind of work backwards in that sense.
Yeah, yeah, no. And this makes so much sense too in terms of why children sometimes have these excess meltdowns from what I
Yes.
know. Again, I don't have little ones running around here or even teens.
Yep.
But it's like because there's such this addictive nature to it, it's almost like a drug. It's like you're constantly getting these hits of dopamine,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this
Yeah.
happens with us as well. But
Totally.
with them, they don't have the way I guess to in which they can maybe reel in those emotions
Yeah.
because they're not in the same development like sector of their lives, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so for them it's like an overwhelm and it's
Yeah.
like you're taking away this dopamine from me. And so they're
Yes.
throwing a fit, which
Right.
makes
Yep.
sense.
Yeah. And it's often disproportionate to what we think it should be, right? It's like, whoa, that was way out of left field. The
Yeah.
other problem is that, first of all, adolescence is a incredibly important time of development for the brain, right? Like it's almost as important. Well, I don't want to compare, but like birth to five is also another huge window of brain development. And what we don't see the physical changes necessarily as much in adolescence as we do from like a newborn to a 5-year old. But what's happening is when our brains get that dopamine and when we're feeling good, we actually have to engage longer the next time around because our brains adapt, which is amazing. Our brains are amazing. And so that's why it becomes increasingly harder and harder to manage to take it away. And so that's where people start to talk about addiction, right? Because if you're adapting to each new level of dopamine, right, it's making you have to stay on longer to get that same feel good high. Now, again, because children, I always talk about children are not standardized. It's not a one size fits all. There are people probably listening who are like, well, my kid can spend 2 hours on Minecraft and be fine. That's true. There are adults who can regulate their time on social media better than others. The point is that we have to be informed ourselves as adults and parents, but also to teach our children. And this is one of the things when it comes to screen time, I always joke it's like other than, I mean, it's parenting is the judgiest sport I've ever played. That's what I say. Because everything. You're always judged. And
Yeah.
screen time is like the judgiest of the judgiest parenting experiences. And I always joke that I need like a sandwich board that says, I'm not judging you whenever people find out what I do, because they're immediately defensive. And I
Yeah.
get it. I totally empathize and I get it. And so I talk a lot about replacing judgment with curiosity. So this is true for us in our relationship with our kids. If we approach the screen time thing with judgment, negativity, a tone of voice that like clearly implies we don't like it, how else are kids are going to respond but defensively? And so this is hard. It's really hard because you're right, parents. It's not good for them. We do want to minimize their exposure, but we can't start by being contentious with them. We actually, I talk about this as going backward to go forward. We have to actually start with the curiosity. So it might be, tell me about what you're building here in Minecraft. You might hate Minecraft. That's fine. It's okay. But to sit side by side, express interest in their interests, say, show me what you're building. Tell me how you figure that out. What are you going to do next time? Let's go after we turn it off. Let's go talk about how you're going to build this in this world later. So you can continue that conversation. Because again, it's not what they're doing. I mean, yes, we should talk about that too, but like it's the relationship. What we want is to maintain and build a strong connection with our kids so that when, not if, they see something online that's sketchy or inappropriate or violent, they come to us. Really, at
Right.
the end of the day, that's like our goal
Yeah,
because
I
that's the
love that.
reality. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a, again, I think that part of the reason why I was just so I was so attracted to your approach with the screen time solution and all of that is just because you do have such an intentional and balanced way in how to approach children in general of all
Yeah.
ages, because it feels as though, I mean, I'm just taking myself back to when I was a kid, and again,
Yeah.
different circumstances, but when I was told no, you can't do that, that's it, that produced a really negative reaction in me
Yeah.
because I was just like, wait, I don't understand. Can we, and I didn't have the like the intellect to like start a very, emotionally intelligent conversation at the time, probably with my parents.
Right.
Like, let's sit and talk about this. I
Right.
was mostly just like, no, I want what I want, and I don't understand why you can't let me have it. So
Right.
this approach, it seems so smart, I guess, is,
You.
for lack of a better word that I can't think of right now, but it just seems like a smart approach because you're engaging with them so
Yeah.
that there's like there's a back and forth, which
Yeah.
allows understanding on both ends.
Absolutely. And it required kids have to. I'm so glad you brought that up. Is like when we were kids too, because parents will say like, well, I just said no, like no is no. And it's like, well, when you were a kid and people said that to you, didn't that make you want to do it more? Didn't that make you
Right.
curious about what was forbidden about it? And I think the pendulum about parenting approaches definitely goes back and forth from generation to generation. Right now, we're sort of in this, it's called snowplow parenting or lawnmower parenting method, which is like you go ahead of your child and mow away obstacles to prevent them from experiencing adversity. And, again, no judgment. I feel like as a parent, the world does feel really intense and really scary all of the time. But when I actually can step back and think about it a little bit, I go, well, that's partly because I can scroll through Twitter because I get news headlines 24/7 on my own devices. So my anxiety is heightened. And this is one of those things as parents, like this is adults, all adults, we have to work on our own anxiety about the world. We have to think about what information am I taking in that is impacting my perception of what's scary versus dangerous, which is a concept I talk about a lot in the book. And
Yeah.
happy to delve more into that too.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely want to touch on that. And I want to, but first I want, you just said something that sort of made me think of parental control
Yeah.
excuse me, not parental controls, but well, yeah, that's what they're called, right?
Yeah.
Parental controls are controls that you set on devices. So I had to like, yeah, I thought about that. Like, wait, did that sound right? That's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
But you have a really interesting viewpoint on parental controls, and I want you to share that because I found it to be really, really almost surprising in a
Yeah.
way. But the
Yeah.
more that I understood and like read up on your thoughts, it made more sense. So tell us about that.
Yes, thank you. So this is definitely something I've gotten heat for because I will say cheekily, I don't recommend parental controls. I recommend parenting, which is also not totally fair because as I said, it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. The problem with parental controls besides the name, which is weird, admittedly, right? We're actually trying to control our children's use, is that too often I hear from parents that they want that solution to make these problems go away. And if they worked, I wouldn't have a business. I wouldn't get that question literally every talk I give. I wouldn't get emailed this question all the time because, and here's why. And there's several things. I think, and I'm going to say this up front, there are times and there are families for whom sometimes these parental controls work just fine. If that's your family, great. I am never going to tell you to ditch it, but every family is different. And what I've heard more often than not is that parental controls give us a false sense of security. They make us think that we have a handle on it, or we think it exempts us from the teaching part. And in my mind, that's the most important part. And so if we are relying on these technical solutions to technical problems, we are not prioritizing what I think is actually the protective part of parenting around digital tech. So, and there's that. The other problem is, it's using tech to solve a problem tech created. They're profiting off of your problem. So when you buy a parental controls or when you spend time and energy, and I hear from parents all the time who are like, it takes me hours and then they get an update and I have to redo the whole thing. And it's like exhausting. They also don't monitor third party content. Like, so it might tell you that your kid downloaded Instagram, but it won't tell you what's happening within the app, right? And so oftentimes parents don't read the fine print. And so to me, that's like, if you've done your homework, you've read it through it, you feel like it's going to work with your family's values, again, go for it. But I don't recommend it for those reasons and more. I think I have like a list of 10 reasons I don't recommend them. But, again, it's not going to be the solution for everyone. And I just worry too much that I worry that there's too much hope that it's the solution.
I
Having
understand.
parental controls does not make the screen time battles go away.
I think that's probably the main point. And I know that and again, people are probably listening, or some parents are probably listening, going, okay, well, if you don't recommend that, then what do you recommend? Which we're
Right.
getting there, friends. We're getting there.
Don't worry.
Uh, do you feel like sometimes, depending on age, parental controls may work better? Like maybe, with younger versus older, or like what would you say
Yeah.
about that?
Well, I'm of the mindset that less is more and later is better. And
Mm,
my whole TLDR of my entire business model and philosophy is later is better, less is more, relationships first. That's the secret to tech intentional parenting or
yeah.
tech intentional living, really. And the reason I say later is better is because, again, brain development, we just know. And again, it's not a complete 100% no tech at all, because I don't think that's realistic. I don't necessarily even think that's necessary. There was a new JAMA study just like a week ago that found for 3 to 5 year olds, 1 hour of screen time did not have a big impact or any effect on their later development, language, and behavioral stuff. So that's fascinating to me. Under an hour a day. For kids who had it 2 or more hours a day, big impact. So to me, that validates the less is more. A little bit's okay, a lot is too much. Again, each child's different, it's going to vary. So I do think, again, the problem with parental controls is it creates the reliance on something external instead of the relationship. To me, that's still the most important part. And for very young children or even children under 10, I just don't think they should be using screens unsupervised, and I don't mean you need to stand over them and watch, but I talk about this idea of like greater than less than. So if your kid is going to watch some videos after school, put it on a big TV in a shared space, put it on a big computer where everyone is hearing it and walking by. Avoid, and it always pick the more public, more visual option, because we don't want kids to be alone in a bedroom with headphones where parents can't hear or see what's going on, and it's
Mm.
like choices within choices. So anytime you can choose that more public option, the better for children, right? So to me, that's parental control, right? That's parental knowing what's going on. And that's it. Like, and there's research to back this up, and I'm happy to give you the study link. But one of the things, I get 2 questions all the time: how much is too much screen time, and what parental controls do you recommend? And those are the wrong questions to ask because of what we just talked about. But the right questions to ask are, do I know what my kid is doing online? And do I have a good relationship with my child? Those 2 questions, knowing those answers, is what will prevent and protect their future mental health. And there is data now to show that. And to me, we miss that too much. Like that is nuanced and it requires the relationship to know what's going on online. And kids are so savvy. I mean, the reality is how many of us like did tech stuff for our parents or still do, right? Kids are always going to find the workaround, not because they're bad, because they're curious and clever and savvy, and they are growing up in this digital world where they understand it a lot better than we do. So we can't assume that we always know. We have to ask, we have to look, we have to talk. And then people always say to me, well, that's an invasion of their privacy. And nothing is private on the internet. The minute you touch a device, your privacy is gone. So if that's how they're interacting or engaging in things that are entertainment based, it's not private. So and the tech companies themselves will tell you, oh yeah, we're tracking all the things you're doing online. So
Yep. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So
And also I would venture to say, and again, I'm not a parent and I don't want letters on this, but but what I will say is that the invasion of privacy thing kind of strikes me. It almost kind of makes me laugh a little bit because we're talking about young children here.
yeah.
Do privacy.
Yeah.
You're raising your children. There should be no privacy there, right?
Yeah, and it's, when we get into the tween years,
Oh,
like
yes.
11, 12, when they're very young, I mean, this is a difference too between, secrets and surprises, right? Like just
Right.
some of those, for sexual abuse prevention,
Of
right? The
course.
language we use. And it's not that children aren't entitled to privacy or private moments. Like if your child wants to write in a journal and put it under their bed, that's fine.
Yeah.
But YouTube can't see that. And so
Right.
that's much more sort of that's much safer, right?
Ex-
Like, and that allows them if that's what they want, right? So I try to help parents understand that that's very different. Me reading and here's a personal example is my 12-year-old daughter and I share my phone. So this is a unique solution and it definitely doesn't work for everyone. And it has been eye-opening beyond belief. Let me tell you, being in sixth grade group chats is a
uh,
whole journey. But when it comes to privacy, here's a great example, right? Like, yeah, she's having social trauma, and I taught middle school, so this is all very familiar to me. I'm like, nothing has changed except we've gone from writing paper notes to putting it on the internet, which is the problem
yeah.
because there are things like screenshotting, right? No one photocopied your love letters and then just, I mean, that would have been a very savvy kid back in the 90s or whatever. But like, we have to assume that whatever you're putting out there, other kids are going to see it. And that really changes the nature of adolescence too.
Yeah.
And like, how do I know who to trust? And how do I trust anything I'm putting it out there? And what about my own protecting my own mental health and feelings about the social drama? Like, I want the support, but I also know it's risky to write it. So it's been
Right.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating. And I had it makes me laugh when you're saying about the notes because I mean, goodness, remember that? And I know that some
Check a
of you guys are
box.
probably, oh my gosh, and you're folding them all up all cute. And oh, that was the best. We
It was
grew up
the
in
best.
such a great time, we really did. We really
I've
did.
heard that people born between like 78 and 82 were like the lucky generation.
Oh,
Like there was sort of
totally.
something about when we came of age and like the world was a little simpler and internet wasn't
Yes.
here. Yeah, it
Yes.
was
Yes.
I do feel lucky. And again, I'm an optimist. I don't want people to think I'm here saying it's all downhill.
Of
I
course.
think we have fights to fight, but and there is a way to use some tech for good. Again, I think there are some amazing things that we can do with it. It's just
Exactly.
we need to wait till the brains have developed. We need
Yes.
the critical thinking skills in place
Mm.
first, like
Yes.
that's
Yes.
that's the piece I worry
Well, and I love that you just brought that up. And I just want to say really quick before we move, because that was my next question
about.
actually
Yeah.
about critical
Yeah.
thinking and developmental skills. But I just want to say that I appreciate you sharing about the privacy thing because in my mind when we were speaking about that, I thought to myself, wait, like for young children on screens, like privacy doesn't exist, right? Like we should have full and I wasn't thinking about the like, obviously when you're growing up in those preteen years or those teen years, privacy
Right.
changes, of course. But my
Oh,
mind was strictly in screen, right? Like
right. Yeah.
that was
We
where I
assume
was
that's
thinking,
where they are, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, no, parents should have an absolute 100% like open eye to whatever they're doing on the screen. There should be
Yeah,
no issue with, this is private, because the
right.
reality is that parents need to parent, right? I mean,
And I think again too, I always again, not our fault, but our responsibility. And
yeah.
for example, Roblox, which is not roadblocks, it's Roblox. It's
Mm.
a massive online game community. It's not one game, it's many, many, many hundreds of thousands of games. And the idea is it's like anyone can go in and create a game and build it. And some of them are very, very, very popular. It is also where predators are known to groom
Oof.
children through chats and through avatars. And part of it is that predators know that young children don't, they're trusting by nature. They don't know how to tell the difference between someone who's a child online or pretending to be a child online. And so when we talk about privacy, for especially for young children, we have to start talking to them about what information you give online because their instinct is to be generous and share. And I mean, it's terrible that we have to think that, but if your kid is spending time in online games or online interaction, that is a non-negotiable. We have to have that conversation.
Yeah,
So,
great
I mean,
point.
a colleague of mine used to say, give them a device when you're ready for them to see porn, and most parents kind of go, but that's
Mm.
it. I mean, it's
Mm.
not if, it's when. So
Yeah,
it's just
well,
what age. Yeah.
that was going to be a question of mine, and we can talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
that in a second.
Yeah.
Um, but you mentioned critical thinking and
Yeah.
developmental skills, and I want to touch
Yes.
on that really quick because I feel like, in a way, it seems as though we're kids might be skipping a lot of steps now
Yes.
in term because they're going straight to the phone to look something
Yep.
up, or
Yes.
straight to technology to figure out a problem. And there's like all of these other things that we used to have to do when we were growing up, but it
Yes.
was part of the developmental
Yes.
process for us.
Yes.
So what do you
Yes.
have to
Yes.
say
Yes.
about all of these steps that are apparently or allegedly being skipped, which seems to be true?
Yes. Skills before screens is one of my mantras, just like
Mm.
constantly. The other piece of that, and I'm really glad we're talking about this, a lot of times and people meaning like ed tech companies and big tech and even schools to some degree are saying, well, tech will make things easier. It will save us time. It will reduce friction. The problem with tech being frictionless is that learning happens in the friction. If we make something easy, we don't have to work to figure it out. So an example I give in my book was this was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. I tutored a little bit after I left the classroom, and this sixth grader came to me. Her school had a one-to-one program, which meant she had an iPad for everything, for books, for notes, her lessons, her homework. Everything was on an iPad. She comes, we're going to do homework. She opens it up. She's like science homework. She opens up a bunch of apps and her ebook. She's trying to find the section. She can't find it. She cuts and pastes the question of her homework into Google to get the answer. And I'm going like, do you know what plagiarism is? And she's cutting and pasting the first answer in Google back into her homework assignment. I mean, kids have cheated forever. This isn't new, but the ease with which she could do it was seconds as opposed to scrolling forever through an ebook to try to find the right section. And she does this and she goes, well, my teacher doesn't really read our answers anyway, which I was like, that's not good. And then she goes, and I said, well, what if you even typed it out in your own words at the very minimum, right? And she goes, I don't know how to type.
Oh.
Her entire education for that sixth grade year was dependent on an iPad that required a very essential skill, right? So when we talk about skills before screens, to me, that is a no brainer. If a child is expected to do something on digital tech but doesn't know how to type, that's problem number one, right?
Yeah.
Or I worry so much, and I see this as a democracy issue. Like protecting democracy is going to mean raising a generation of children who can think critically. And if we keep giving them tech to make their life easier, they are not ever going to be put into situations where they have to think critically or where they have to be uncomfortable or where they have to talk to someone they don't agree with. It's too easy to avoid those things. And that plays into the parental anxiety too. Pew Research found that the third number three parenting fear in the US is kidnapping. And what is fascinating to me is that kidnapping is so rare. I mean, first of all, it's usually like a known person, like within split parents, it
Hmm.
does happen. But especially kidnapping by a stranger is statistically so rare. Why are parents saying this is their number three fear? Well, first of all, how many crime documentaries do we have and watch? What are the clickbait headlines that get parents all worked up about scary things? We hear about predators online in chat rooms who do lots of terrible things, but aren't necessarily kidnapping children. Not that what they're doing is good, but it's not always leading to kidnapping. And statistically, somebody actually did the math. They found that if you want your kid to be kidnapped, they'd have to stand outside on the curb for 750,000 years to be guaranteed of being kidnapped.
What?
That's
Wow.
how rare it is. And yet, it's the number three parent fear. Now, here's what's fascinating to me. Number one and number two parental fears in the US: bullying and mental health. So the problem is that parents go, I'm afraid my kid is going to get kidnapped. So I'm going to give them a phone to protect them. And the irony is that giving a kid a phone makes number one, bullying, and two, mental health a million times worse. So it's this like vicious cycle, right? And it's in part because of our own consumption of clickbait, fear inducing media. And then we make these decisions that are not rational. They're, persuaded by the design features of our own devices. And we give kids tech too soon. So that's what I see right now is so fascinating to me, that those three fears are so contradictory and yet so intertwined.
So intertwined. And wow, that's first of all, that is fascinating. Even just the 750,000
I know.
years or whatever, that blew my mind.
Yeah.
But this is what is essentially plays in. And I know you speak about this in your book about scary versus
Yes,
dangerous, because so
exactly.
many parents are saying, well, I have to give my kid a phone or a smartwatch because they walk home from school, or they're at their friend's house and what if they need me or whatever. But what you're saying is that sometimes or oftentimes we're also inadvertently uh, allowing for them to not use their critical thinking skills
Yeah.
to solve problems without
Yes.
just picking up the phone. That's essentially what you're saying.
And and this is going to be, I'm saying this out loud and it's going to be hard to hear for some people. Surveillance erodes trust.
Mm.
Trust is absolutely critical to healthy relationships. Now, I hear this all the time. My kid walks home from school, they're going to a friend's house, I want to be able to reach them. And my question is, then why a smartphone? There are flip phones on the market that are non-internet connected. There are old school, there's a company called Light, and I don't do endorsements, I don't endorse products for a variety of reasons, but there are options. They are much cheaper, much more durable, and they are very simple. If your true concern is I just need to be able to coordinate plans, why a smartphone?
Yeah.
Now, that is often mixed in with peer pressure. Everyone else has a smartphone. And I get asked this a lot too. There are sort of kid-friendly smartphone alternative companies that produce, phones that look like smartphones or watches for kids. I actually think the watches are worse than a flip phone because they're on your body and they're highly distracting.
Mm.
So, and I was just quoted this week in the Associated Press, did a story about what stop texting your kids while they're at school. And, it's a huge problem. But this is what happens all the time when your kid has that friction, back to friction. It's easy for the parent to text the kid directly than to call the front office or email the teacher, right? But that's not better for the kid. That's for our convenience. And so then we have to be uncomfortable with not being able to reach them 24/7. And I would love to push back on the idea and say, what does a child gain by being able to walk home alone from school or go to a friend's house without being reachable? Or, let's say they have a friend conflict. So often kids are texting their parents in the middle of a friend conflict or saying, come pick me up. We are not doing them any favors by rescuing them from normal. And again, I
Mm.
realize there are extremes, but
Mm-hmm.
normal social dynamics. Children, especially after the isolation of the pandemic, need lots and lots of practice interacting with other people, problem solving themselves. And when we give them the device, the message they hear is, we don't trust you to figure this out yourself. Now, it doesn't mean we don't give it to them and say, good luck. We teach them because that's what our job is as a parent. We walk the walking route with them. We point out the businesses they can go into and ask for help. We teach them how to ask for help. We have them memorize our phone numbers. I cannot tell you how many kids do not know their parents' phone numbers because it's in their phone.
I was just talking about this. Oh my gosh, this is so funny. Probably a month ago, I was with uh I was with a childhood friend. We're still friends. I was with her mom.
And you
And
remember her phone
and
number?
we were in the car and I said, I still remember the phone number for when we were, this was like 35 years ago. I mean, no, more than that. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
43. So it's like,
yeah,
and I rattled off her phone number and she started laughing. She goes, Vanessa, I can't believe that you still remember. I said, I remember all of our phone numbers.
oh,
But
you
these
stored that in
days,
your long-term
yes,
memory.
yes. But these days,
Friction.
I don't
Yep,
think that, and that does not surprise me how that
yeah,
it's like the button is just there. Like, why would they memorize it? But you're
exactly.
so right. I mean, maybe parents just, if they work on these, just things that maybe we, and I know it sounds funny. I want to like, I don't want to say, oh, well, just do what we did. Like, because I realize we're living in a different time. That makes sense. But it is so important, I think, to just like kind of be foundational, right?
Yeah. There was nothing, I mean, all of those skills are still relevant to development.
Yeah.
And technology can display, I mean, again, like even to the student I work with, someday it is true that probably all her materials were going to be online and that she's going to, whether or not I think that's a good idea is different. Well, why do that in sixth grade? Like there wasn't a developmental need for it yet, but there was a need for her to learn how to type. Like that was a skill we learned, and that was pre-internet, and we still learned typing. We had a typing class, and
Yeah.
so to me, it's like the rush to tech was done so fast, and again, pandemic accelerated that we didn't really stop and think about like, well, what's actually going to be good for learning for children, for brain development, and I will, a lot of the activism I do is around ed tech and the amount of technology in schools. And I think the pandemic helped parents see how much of it's going on. And of course, schools were just, buying up platforms left and right to try to patch things during the early, especially the early days. And again, look, that spring of 2020, it was a lifeboat. Technology saved us in a lot of ways to be able to connect and stay connected. But a lifeboat isn't long term housing. And so we are still trying to live in a lifeboat and expect that kids who are growing and they're too big and the boat's tipping and wobbling, it's not going to work anymore. And so I'm really concerned about that schools feel a lot of pressure to continue renewing these very expensive platforms that siphon children's data and sell it to other companies. I mean, there's so many privacy issues with the school piece, and I think parents have no idea. We could do a whole podcast just about that.
Yeah, I was
It's
gonna
like
say.
it's a whole can of worms. And it used to be that school was the place kids could go and be relatively screen free. So even if a child was getting 2 or 3 or 4 hours at home, school was 6 hours of mostly no screens. That is not the case anymore. I mean, we're talking kindergartners on iPads during the school day. And so yeah, I just invite parents, and again, please don't go and attack your teacher because man, teachers are between a rock and a hard place. They don't have a choice a lot of the time. They're fleeing the profession as it is. I mean, burnout is real.
Yes.
But please don't let the school administration or the district tell you that tech is the solution to this problem. And AI in education is coming, and it's not the cheating I'm worried about. It's the displacement of human relationships and teachers in the name of tech. So that's a whole. Just wrote an essay about that on my
Oh my
blog.
God.
But it's yeah,
Oh,
it's coming and it's scary. And that's where parents we have to be really awake because
yeah.
it's a big tsunami.
Oh my gosh, there's so many branches I could go off of
I know.
just the last 2 minutes. I'm like, I don't even know where to go. But let's stay here for a second with
Okay.
schools,
Yeah.
because that was something that I wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
and I'm so glad that you brought it up. So, I know that it's happening with super young children now too, like elementary and stuff like that. So clearly there's a developmental situation going on there. And it sounds like a lot of teachers are having either a hard time with it or they're having a hard time adjusting, and there's probably extremes. I mean,
Yep.
maybe some really love it,
Yep.
but and I feel like probably parents that send their children to school, especially public school, they probably feel like they don't have a lot of say. They probably feel like
Yeah.
their hands are tied. Is that
Yeah.
actually true? And can they actually say something or prevent their child from getting involved in an activity or an assignment?
Short answer is parents always should have a voice. And actually, the advantage of public schools is they have public testimony at school board meetings. You can get stuff, you can go and testify and put something on the record expressing your concern. And, that's one of those sort of strategies of leaving a paper trail. So you're saying, like, I warned you or I asked you and I'm not getting a response. The other thing is to find other parents and share your concerns. Find a sympathetic administrator. School counselors are worried about this. Some teachers are really worried. And again, I to replace judgment with curiosity. Just say, I'm just noticing a lot of this tech. Is there something I can do? How do you feel about it? A lot of parents have no idea. And I think getting that information first, start with your kid. A lot of times kids can show you everything they're doing, and it's shocking. I mean, kids have access to YouTube at school. Most kids K-12 have access to YouTube at school
Wow.
unless parents have explicitly asked it to be blocked. And that's not even, I call it digital whack-a-mole, because you can block the app. Kids know how to go. I mean, for example, kids are watching TikTok videos in Pinterest, and parents are like, Pinterest is great, it's crafting. No, they're watching TikTok videos, and you might have blocked TikTok, but they're using it through Pinterest. The other thing I want to say, and there are at least two really distinctly different problems for education and tech. One is the tech itself for learning and teaching, whether that's the hardware, kids are getting laptops and iPads, or the software, like the curriculum and the apps that are online. And that encompasses a whole lot of things. The second area, though, is student personal devices, kids bringing phones and watches to school. We know it's something like 70% of 12-year-olds have their own smartphone. 33% of 8-year-olds have their own smartphone now. Yes, it used to be that a K-5 school wouldn't have to have a policy about phones at school. And when my daughter, this was just last year, was in 5th grade, the principal sent an email home and said, just a reminder, parents, if you send your kid to school with watches and phones, they need to be silent and in the bag because they're going off during class and interrupting the learning. Right? Don't text your kids at school. So here we're going, oh my gosh, I thought this was a high school, middle school problem. Now we're talking K-5 is having to send messages out. So
Wow.
right off the bat, one of the most effective things parents can do is advocate for a phone-free school. And that means from first bell to last bell. And yes, I even think high schools should be doing this. There's
Mm.
been a huge grassroots movement recently in the UK around smart free phone schools. But many of us in my activism work have been talking about this for a long time. Like, this is a no brainer. No school that's done this has ever said, well, that was a mistake. The hardest part is getting some parents on board. Certainly the kids don't like it, but actually, I think they appreciate it. This is the kind of thing where kids will say, I hate your rules. I hate your boundaries. You're so mean. You're the worst parent ever. And deep down inside, they appreciate the boundary. They need it. And
Yeah.
that's, I know we're on a podcast, but I often use this gesture, and excuse the middle finger, but I feel like if there's this gesture of middle finger and then come to me, come, beckoning. And that's what it's like parenting tweens and teens. And we have to ignore the middle finger and recognize their bid for connection and their need for boundaries. That's healthy. Kids need boundaries. So yes. So there's those two simultaneous problems. I am so grateful that my daughter's school has a phone free, phone away for the day. It makes my parenting job so she can ask me for a phone, and I say, well, your school doesn't even allow it. Why would I send you to school with a phone? Right? You're not allowed to have it. That makes my parenting job so much easier.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools don't have that. That is the minority, I would say, is most schools don't. And you also, and this, I'm not the only one to say this, but look at where the big tech executives send their children.
Mm.
Waldorf, nature-based, phone-free school.
That should
Right?
tell you all you need to know right
Yep,
there.
yep, exactly. They
Yep.
know
Yep.
something that we're only learning now.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that is very important for parents to know that we're
And
right.
yeah, well, and I even, I can suspect too that there are some parents that just go, oh gosh, like I couldn't even imagine like a phone-free school though. That just seems like, so rigid and like even I don't know if I would love that. But the reality is that you have to ask yourself probably, why don't I love that though?
Yeah. Well,
Right?
and
Because
what were schools up until 10 years ago were
exactly.
phone-free. Like
Exactly.
we've done this before. We can do
Yeah.
it again. And
Yeah.
if it's what's best for kids, and if it takes some of the stress off teachers. And I'm very clear it's got to be bell to bell, because sometimes schools will say, oh, well, teacher, either they leave it up to individual teachers, or they say, during class, they have to put them in like a shoe pocket. I mean, it's better than nothing. But the problem is, I just read about this in the AP article. One teacher was like, yeah, but kids then take old phones from home and put the old phone in the pocket and keep their real phone on them. Kids are savvy. We can't, like, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? Like, sure, a phone free school is still going to have kids sneaking phones in,
Sure.
but it's also leveling the playing field. I mean, we can't underestimate the fact, first of all, not 100% of kids have phones, and they're very expensive, right? So you have this. I mean, there's so many problems we can talk about, like consent. If you don't have a phone, but someone's taking pictures of you, right? Or you are holding a friend's phone and you drop it and it breaks, who's responsible for fixing it or paying for it, right? Like
Mm,
schools don't want to deal with all that, or
yeah.
shouldn't want to deal with all that, plus the drama that comes with it. So
Yeah, it just
yeah,
seems like it would simplify things in the best way, even if it's like, oh, yeah, well, we're in this modern age and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but you know what? I mean, still, I think it would really not only simplify things, but it would really help in so many
yeah,
aspects, and the pros would outweigh the cons so much.
I agree.
I want to stay in the school sector real
Yeah,
quick, but also not, because I realize this happens out of school. And I want to speak to, or I should say, I want you to speak to teens specifically,
yeah,
because I know that I have several friends that are now parents of teenagers, and some of them have had a really tough time
yeah,
with them, with social media and with their mental health and just
yeah,
like everything that surrounds that. And I know it's really hard at this stage in the game, say if they're in if they're teens, to like
yeah,
take away a phone or take away a
right,
smartphone. Like
totally.
they're already there, they've already got it,
Yeah,
it's already introduced. But there's a lot of, I you said it earlier, there's like bullying, there's the comparison trap that's happening.
totally.
There's also this like false sense of life and
Yep,
reality, because
yep,
they're just looking at life through screens and not
totally.
real life,
Literal filters. Yeah.
literal
Mhm.
filters. So how can parents that sort of feel frustrated
Yeah,
and probably burnt out, how can
yeah,
they approach this with their teens? Because my
yeah,
heart goes out to them.
totally.
Really, I feel like it is such a tough situation to be in for so many parents.
I totally agree. And I'm glad you asked, because there's lots of teenagers in the world right now.
Yeah.
And I will validate that the research is there. The US Surgeon General's warning in the fall last year was that mental health crisis among youth is a very real and very concerning. I mean, he said it's a health advisory or whatever. And we know that, especially for teen girls on Instagram, it's like 1 in 3 teen girls has seriously contemplated suicide, in part because of their consumption of social media and the body image, eating disorder, all of that stuff that gets fed to them. And again, we go back to the brains. Teenagers are still children. And it's like, sometimes we think like, oh no, they're not, but they're children. Their brains are still like more like a child's brain than like an adult's brain, even though their bodies might look more like an adult. And that's so confusing. It's why we react differently when they get mad at us. So again, they go back to the relationship. You're right. You can't just walk up to your teen and yank the phone out. But any window of connection, any opportunity, even if you're in the middle of cooking something and they say, Mom, I need to talk to you, drop it and give your attention. And I always tell parents a great time to talk to your teen is in the car, because side by side is much easier than face to face. Like, you don't have to make eye contact, but you can't go anywhere. Like they're sort of stuck with you. So it's another good reason to have like no phones in the car, or like minimize that. Um, but always start with curiosity. Again, like, hey, I noticed you're really exhausted, and sleep is a low hanging fruit. This, like how valuable it is to our mental health. And a lot of times kids are staying up late on social media, either because they're afraid of missing something or because they're worried about a friend, right? Like a friend might be expressing anxiety and depression or even suicidal ideation, and they don't want to abandon their friend. Or kids who are LGBTQ, for a lot of that community, an online support group might be the only support they have. So it's very tricky. I don't suggest we just pull the rug out from under them, but we have to find a way to have a conversation without the judgment, and to ask, how can I support you? I see this is impacting your life. It impacts my life too, right? We can include ourselves. This is hard for me. It is not your fault. I want to help you. And some teens are going to bristle at this. You're going to have to keep trying. I mean, I get it. I know people are going, well, my kid won't even talk to me, and find your way back, whatever it is, whatever it takes, that's the starting point. And it's going to have to be a lot of those small moments that build. It won't change overnight. So it's got to be continual effort. Don't give up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you just said something that made me think. You just said it essentially. I'm just probably saying in different words, which is small changes still change. So don't
Yes.
feel like if they're not monumental like visual changes that are happening or emotional
Yeah.
changes that are happening, that doesn't mean that it's not making some sort of a dent, you know?
Totally. And the
Yeah.
eye rolling and the,
Yeah.
snarky language, they are still hearing you. And
Yeah.
I even see it with my 12-year-old. Like I noticed the other day, for example, she was screenshotting something and I on the phone that we share. And I was like, oh, this is never a good idea, right? Like screenshotting can always, I mean, that's one great teachable moment for kids, right? Is why screenshots are so bad. They always come back to you. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And the next day I was sort of like, so do you want to talk about this? I was like, make a mistake, you can always own it. And she did the whole like, mom, leave me alone, I'm fine. But then later I saw a text pop up that was owning it, where she said I made a mistake and I shouldn't have taken a screenshot. And so it was like, if I had only gone by what she showed me and what I heard her verbalize, wouldn't I would have assumed she was ignoring me and didn't register any. But then again, I can see, I'm not sitting there reading her texts 24/7, but they
Yeah.
pop up on my computer or my phone. And I was like, yes, the message landed, right?
Yeah.
We have had this conversation multiple times too, right? So again, that small baby steps is just, you just have to keep, don't give up. I mean, I really just feel like don't give up. And a lot of parents are like, why bother? I mean, my kid's going to leave home at 18 anyway. And P.S. A lot of kids aren't leaving home at 18.
No,
Child
they're not.
has extended for many
Yeah.
kids, and that's not necessarily bad, but we want to equip them for an adulthood and a workplace that helps them understand why they need to put it down. And as their brains are changing, can they start to have that self-awareness of like, you know, and this is one of my favorite tips. And I don't know if we were going to get to this, but this idea of living your life out loud, right? That you narrate what you do as you are doing it. And so for teens, okay, don't fight them on that Instagram. Just have them say, like, okay, I'm reaching for my phone and I'm opening Instagram and I'm just going to check my DMs, and I'll, blah, 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 blah. Like, live your life out loud. And I'm talking about it for teens, but usually what I tell parents is start with you first. And this is good for non parents too.
Oh my gosh.
Start living your life out
So
loud.
good. Oh my gosh,
Yes,
I can't even believe that you're saying this right now. I can't.
yes.
Well, and I want you to finish your thought, but this literally just happened. This conversation just took place in my home.
Okay, well, there you go. Here's the solution. And it's so funny because once you start doing it, you notice when no one else is doing it. And
Yes.
it's like, that is so rude.
Oh
I
my
Why
gosh.
are they picking up their phone? I'm standing right here. And if your husband's just saying, "Oh, hey, I'm just checking," and look, again, I always say to parents or to anybody, do this 80% of the time. You're not going to do this 100%. It's okay. But there is friction there, right? To go back to our theme today, right? Like if I have to say it out loud, and maybe this, and I'm not a dietitian or a wellness expert, but like I know that if I write down what I eat, I pay more attention to what I eat. Just same concept here. If I have to say it out loud, I just am being more intentional about what I'm doing. And it's okay to say, oh gosh, I've got, all these Instagram messages and I'm scrolling and I don't feel better and I'm in this rabbit hole now and I was going to just check one thing and I got distracted. This is such powerful modeling of like how we use tech as adults, of how it distracts us, how it affects our emotions. And if your kids are rolling their eyes while you do it, it's working. That's what I always say. It's like if
Mm.
your partner is rolling their eyes. And so I love it. I've definitely given this tip to all like humans, parent or non-parent. It is very effective and you do it together. You hold each other accountable. It's like a game. You're like, you're picking up your phone. I want to know, you don't have to tell me what you're writing, but like, I'm sending a text. I'll be with you in a moment, right?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So just because it's
Yeah.
like I would be crazy not to share this at this point because it fits so perfectly like a perfect puzzle piece. So
Okay.
last night I was on the couch and I am very vocal in general. I will just say, I mean, hello, look at what I'm doing.
Podcast
Look at what I
host.
do for a living, right? But my husband, he is not. I mean, he's vocal in certain settings, but like he's not someone who's like constantly looking
Mm-hmm.
for conversation, right? Like Like
Right.
we
Right.
tend to be fairly opposite in that regard. But I live a lot of my life out loud, down to the fact that, or down to the reality, I should say, that he actually asked me like a week ago, "Why are you constantly speaking? You're not even speaking to people. You're just speaking." And I like, it's because I live my life out loud. I don't know, but he literally sat down on the couch last night. Oh, bless. He's going to listen. He might listen to this too. I'll tell him to, just so, it's perfect. So he sat down and we were talking. We were talking as he sat down. He came in from work, changed, sat down, and I think he asked me a question. And as I started to answer him, he picked up his phone and started texting. And I looked at him and he's like, "What?" And I said, "Jason, you I'm talking and you're,"
Yeah.
and he goes, "Well, I'm responding because of X, Y, and Z, and it was work related." And I go, "Can you do me a favor? Just say that. Just say it." Because that I can't mind read, right? Like and to me it just shows that that takes priority over me, which is, again, I'm not like sitting here throwing a fit about it, but it would help so much to say, "Hold on one second, hold that thought. Let me just
Yeah.
respond and I'll get back."
Exactly. Exactly. And you guys are adults, right? And
Yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
great, this is good for your relationship. It's good, saying I want to hear you. I always encourage parents to think about what this must feel like for a child.
Mm.
If what they see is the back of our phone and we're texting, or we're in the middle of engaging with our child and we get a text and we pull our attention away, it's like giving permission to someone for someone who's not even in the room. You're giving permission for them to interrupt you. Why do
Mm.
they get that power when I'm sitting right here with you? And for a child, what's going to happen is they're going to work a lot harder to get your attention. So there is evidence that as parents are distracted by devices, kids' behavior gets worse. Duh, because they're going to work really hard. And the quote I love is, "Where attention goes, energy flows."
Yes, I
Putting all
love
this
that quote.
Yeah, if you're putting all this attention into the phone, then they're going to say, "Well, I have to compete with the phone." It's okay if you're with your child and you get an important work text and you have to say, "Hold on, I hear you. I need to respond to this, and then I'm going to put it away and I have you for my full attention to you."
Yeah.
Or my kid will do this too sometimes. I'll start to talk to her and she'll start to text back to a friend or something. And I'll say, "I'm going to wait until you're done because I don't want to talk to you when you're distracted. So tell me when you're ready."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, I'm hoping, will be her cue later when she's engaging with friends to say, "You're not listening to me." That's phubbing, by the way.
Uh,
Phone snubbing. Have you heard that term?
no. I love that
Phubbing.
though.
Yeah,
Fubbing.
phubbing. No one
Fubbing.
likes being phubbed, and we've all been there, done that. So
It's such a good tip. You guys, I hope you're hearing this. This is so good, again, for parents and for non-parents like myself.
totally.
And also, I think it's important to say, which I've probably been guilty of doing this if I'm honest with you, and my husband would probably say, "Yeah, you have been guilty of that," if he's listening.
Yeah,
But it's important to say it just without sarcasm, right? Because
yeah,
it really is, for example, like, "Hey, I'm going to pick back up when you're done with your task."
yeah.
Not like, I'm going to, not giving this
Exactly.
crazy
Totally.
attitude. Yeah.
Totally. So we have to be really intentional about that with
Intentional.
kids,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Intentional. So it's not like, I'm not saying to my daughter, "Oh, fine, I can see you're not listening to me." It's like, I'm gonna wait. I'm clear, I'm direct, but I'm
Yes.
like, I'm just gonna hold my comment until you're ready because I can see you're not ready. And it's not patronizing, it's just an observation, right?
Yeah, even if
So
you're annoyed, because like
yeah,
me on the couch last night, like I was clearly annoyed when I was speaking and he just continued, and it was like he kept texting too. It wasn't like a 5 second, it was like
right,
30 seconds or 35
right.
seconds. But I held it and I just said, I just stopped and I go, "I'll wait. I'll literally
Yeah,
just wait until you're done." And
yeah,
and it's like the defense comes in, "Well,
yeah.
it's this, it's
Right, right, right.
work." And
There's
I go,
always a good
"Okay,
reason,
it's
right?
cool. Yep, it's cool
Right.
that it's work, but just let me know." Because again, it
Exactly.
sends a message that the priority is the phone and the
Yeah,
priority is not in front of you. And so, and again, like,
exactly.
this is
Exactly.
probably something we all deal with, married,
Yeah.
single, friends,
Yeah.
parents,
And
we
it's
all
such an
deal.
easy, you don't need any special skill set to do this. And
Right.
the last thing I would add to that is to then, when someone does it, is to thank them and to say,
Ah,
"Thank you for living your life out loud. I hear that you need to finish this text," and then you'll give your full attention, right? I like to use humor and, with my teen, if he's reaching for his phone, I'll say, "What are you doing? Live your life out loud." And he'll sort of like roll his eyes at me and be like, "I'm just looking up my school assignment," or whatever it is. So And then I say thank you. Again, where attention goes, energy flows. If I want to reinforce a behavior, then I need to give it lots of attention and celebrate that success, because it's so easy to focus on the why don't you do this and you never say that. And that's then where all the attention goes, right? Is to that
Yeah.
stressy, argumentative side.
It's
So
so true. Oh my gosh. I even think this is a really off. This is a left squirrel comment, but
yeah,
off air before we started, we were talking about the dogs and how like
yes,
noisy they were.
yeah,
And it's like even with reinforcement with like my
yes,
animals,
totally.
it's like the more that I literally bark back at them and
Yeah,
don't celebrate when they're being good or when they positively reinforce them,
yeah,
like that's not going to be helpful, right? So
no,
I definitely need to place more of the energy on when the things are happening that are good for our, I should say, pet parent slash relationship.
anybody, any
It's
human connection.
yeah,
Yes, totally,
exactly. Yeah, it really does
totally.
make it, I mean, again, it's just it's so interesting how we're very much in this topic of screens and solutions for balance and stuff like that, but a lot of these ideas and concepts are applicable in so many different areas of our
Totally.
life,
Exactly. Like
you
you can
know?
live your life out loud about non-screen stuff because it builds
Totally.
executive function, and it helps children know how you get from A to B to C and how you plan something. Those are really, really wonderful skills for kids to have. So, I didn't invent it. It was a colleague of mine at a center for ADHD actually. So executive function is the name of the game for that. And so using your digital tech, I just sort of applied it to that, but you can do it for anything. And yeah, I feel like it's one of those really easy things that doesn't have a downside.
It doesn't. And I'm going to have to educate my husband tonight at dinner about how I have been living my life out loud, not
Yeah,
even knowing that it was something good for me. And here I am, and I'm not going to stop. I'm sorry.
exactly.
I'm
You
not going to
nope,
stop.
I support it. I support it.
Yeah, Emily supports it. So
That's right. Hi,
this is
Jason.
Oh, he'll get a kick out of this for sure. Okay, so before we move, I know we have a couple more things to tackle, but I did want to, because you touched on it earlier, and it's a very serious segue here, but I do want you to speak to it just a little bit. You made a comment about porn and
Yeah.
children, and especially, of course, when they're in the teen range, preteen to teen range. You said it's not about if, it's when. So
Yeah.
I know that probably, curls the toes of a lot of parents. But again, a lot of parents probably know this as well. So what can you say, and can you speak to porn a little bit in terms of screens and like any tips that you can give?
Yes. Parents, we have to assume that our kids are going to see porn if they haven't already. And again, it's not because our kids are looking for it. We have to remember children are naturally curious and porn is everywhere. And the thing about porn is that it runs the gamut, right? Like, there's a wide variety, shall we say. And it's to me, especially with the younger kids, it's actually not even the hardcore porn. And again, like not in any way suggesting we want kids to see that. It's actually the more innocent searches that kind of go wrong. So, for example, I always talk about like when my son was about 8 and he was so into Harry Potter and he wanted to order a scarlet robe to like go with his Harry Potter costume. Type scarlet robe into the internet and you get lingerie. So it's not even, that's not even porn. It was like ads, but they were women in lingerie, which is
Yeah.
like for a young kid is like, whoa, that's not what I was looking for. Or a mom told me about how her daughter really loved American Girl dolls, like the toys that come with all these different outfits and different time periods. And her daughter wanted an American Girl bikini or bathing suit. And so she typed in American Girl bathing suit, and you get these busty women in American flag bathing. Right. So again, oftentimes it's unintentional, it's inadvertent, which is why again we have to front load the conversation. We have to talk to our children, and I'm talking ages 2 and 3, about some things on the internet for kids and some things are for grown-ups. And if you ever see something you don't understand, you need to tell me. And if I can convey any message to parents, it is when your child tells you that they've seen something, your response is thank you for telling me, period. It's not what were you doing or how dare you or oh my gosh. It's thank you for telling me, because if you say anything else, guess where they're going to go next time?
Yeah.
The internet. Do we want that? Absolutely not. And again, this is uncomfortable and cringy for us as adults. You don't need to give kids, young children, the details. You have to find the developmentally appropriate way. And a lot of times kids just don't know like they might be uncomfortable but not know. And so that's why we want to, again, that relationship piece is so important. And it might just be, like somebody asked me for what school I went to, but I don't know who it is, and it's like, well, here's a good rule of thumb on the internet. Just don't tell people where you go to school. Don't post pictures in front of your house with your street address. Don't give anyone your birthday. Like all of these very innocent things. And this is the problem with, predatory grooming and stuff online, is it starts very innocently. It starts with very simple, like, hey, you have a dog, I have a dog, what a cute dog, will you send me a picture of your dog, right? Like making kids, so we have to, it's not, nothing is 100% a guarantee, right? But we have to just have these ongoing conversations. And again, my own daughter and I, because we share this account, got me locked out of my own Google business account because some YouTube is owned by Google. Somehow she was asked to put in her birth date in some sort of a YouTube channel, which of course then I was like, what are you doing? And she put in her birthday because one of our values was like, you're honest about who you are and you don't lie. And yet on the internet, if you put in that you're 11 years old, Google's like, how do you have an LLC? Cancel. So again, it's this really mixed, confusing message for children too. And this is, the sad reality is we know it's like 95% of teens, and I think it's 60% of 8 to 12-year-olds are on social media. Here's the problem. The federal law, the current federal law, is that 13 and up is the law at the age at which children are allowed to be on social media. But if we have 40, 50, 60% of 8 to 12-year-olds, there are people lying about their age online. And again, not blaming parents, because we do this too, right? We lied about our age online before. But the reality is that kids are there, whether it's allowed or not. So one other suggestion I would make is anytime your kid is asking for an app or a game, is make an account first as yourself and try it for 2 weeks and see what gets pushed to you. What kind of DMs do you have? How does the algorithm know what you're interested in? You can fake it. You can make a fake account. Again, here I am telling you to lie on the internet, but in the name of helping your children. And I did this with Snapchat after the congressional hearings, in which all these big tech CEOs went on and on about everything on Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok are all appropriate for ages up over 13. And I was like, well, let me go make a fake account as a 15-year-old. I'm not kidding, within 30 seconds, porn pushed to me by the algorithm. Yeah, just because it knew I was a 15-year-old girl. So, and it wasn't even porn, like hardcore. This is the issue. It's like weird. It's weird stuff. It's like very sexualized women, or jokes that are very adult humor, but like a child isn't going to understand. So that's why it's like, it's not like porn is a black and white thing. It's like content. It's just the confusion of it. So yeah, it's the Wild West out there. And unfortunately, AI is making this worse. I'm hearing from schools where students are taking student photos and imposing them in porn videos. Fake porn. So now you have a known person being put, and I mean, there's all kinds of laws that are problematic there, but also, can you imagine? It's not like your child could have no phone, no social media account, and another kid could take their photo and impose it in a porn video. Like, that's where we are. And again, I'm not saying this because parents need to go and freak out, and it is scary. It's not common, but it is something we need to be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the fact that you brought up that it's not black and white, because I think that's really important. It's like, oh, well, I know my child, I know Johnny, or I know, Sally they're not looking at like, porn, but
No.
there's all these different versions. And you said the word content. There's all this content that is
Yeah.
not necessarily straight porn, but it's definitely inappropriate,
Yes.
and so there's like all this gray area.
Right.
Uh,
And
but
kids are naturally curious. Like, I had
yeah.
a parent tell me once that she found on it was like her 13-year-old search history, that he had typed girls with pants on because he wanted he was curious.
Oh.
He didn't want the whole thing. Like, and so on the one hand, you go, oh my gosh, like that in the olden days, it might have been a magazine, or, like a book that you found lying, or the
Yeah.
National Geographic, right? Like,
Yeah.
but the kid, there isn't that, it's just so available. And so again, like it's innocent usually. I mean, children are innocent until they're corrupted by outside forces, perhaps is the way to put it. The other thing I do want to add is that the algorithm applies to everyone in the family. If there's someone else in the family who has searched porn, watched porn, stumbled across porn, the algorithm of Google in your house is going to push that because what you search for is what comes up.
Yes.
So that's a
Yes.
little problematic, right?
Yeah.
Like adults consenting, that's very different. But if you know it's going to show up in your kids' feed, that's not great. So just a
That's a
word for wise.
great point. Great point. Yeah, there's a lot to say about that, which that's a
Yeah,
whole nother show.
totally.
Whole nother show.
Yep.
But yeah, it may actually indirectly make you look at your own
Yeah.
behavior as
Yep.
well if you're a
Yep.
parent. Which maybe is helpful.
Not bad.
I would say, yeah, a helpful thing. But yeah, this seems like a really, really hot and very it, ju- it, a topic that has gotten people scared. I mean, I'm trying to like come
Yeah.
up with a word here, but it's scare. It's scared. Parents are scared about this
Yeah.
aspect, and I hear it too, just in
Yeah.
talks with friends and stuff like that.
Totally.
And it just seems like obviously these kids are exposed younger and younger and younger.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, what you're saying is that the relationship
Yes.
that you have with them is really going to be what makes the difference.
Totally.
Yeah,
And courage is not the absence of fear.
that's right.
It's being afraid and doing it anyway.
Yep.
And so if people listening are fearful right now or anxious or worried, act anyway.
Yeah.
Everything you do that is working towards a relationship with your kid, even the tiny, tiny things matters. And so I don't want the message here to be it's hopeless, it's terrible. What's the point?
Yeah.
It always matters. And yeah, it's hard, but it matters.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I could not agree more. I absolutely could not agree more. I feel like we've covered a lot, but there's, I can't help but think that there's got to be people listening that are just still feeling like, yeah, this sounds amazing and there's been great tips and all that, but I still feel like incredibly stuck. I feel like I'm in a unique situation. I feel like
Yeah,
my kid is dealing with X, Y, and Z issue.
yeah,
I feel like, maybe my husband or wife and I are not on the same page, which is
I hear that a lot.
a
Yep.
huge issue as well. So I just, I don't know if this is just really too big of a question for you, but which I don't think so, because I feel like you're just full of wisdom. But I'm saying like I don't want to be unfair and just be like just throw it in your face. But it's like what advice do you have for that parent? I know it's a broad question, but
Yeah.
who just feels so stuck as we kind of wind down here.
I'm going to have a story that I think will illustrate this. I took a mindfulness meditation class. Like I went in and I had young kids at the time and I was just exhausted and it made me feel amazing. It was like, an hour of just by myself thinking, breathing. And at the end, somebody asked the teacher, well, how many minutes a day do you recommend we meditate? And she said, one breath. And I have never forgotten that because I was like, I can do that. I can go back to my crazy life and make room in it for one breath. And
Mm,
I thought, I don't feel like a failure. I've tried to meditate before, tried to, it's just like I always have an excuse or it's too busy or I can't get relaxed. And then I was like, but I can do one breath. So for parents who are listening, one breath, one thing, one comment, one intentional tweak of your own tech habits, right? Like just find the starting point. Like that's the hardest part is the first step, right? Like
right.
just making that first thing. And it might be, I do hear all the time, well, when she goes to her dad's house, the rules are different, or my partner and I aren't on the same page. Yeah, that happens. And we can only control what goes on in our own homes and we can only control our own reaction to things. And so how do we find common ground? It might be I've worked with families where the goal was one meal a week without devices. One. That was the goal. And we worked for 8 weeks together. So like that, it's going to look different for every family. But that was their that was their starting point. And they were willing to do that hard work to just get that. And again, replace that judgment with curiosity. This is hard. You're not alone. The deck is stacked against us as humans and as parents. And so, yeah, the one breath, one
I
step.
love that. I love that just in life in general,
Yeah,
like because it's so, in this on this show in general, the guests, you guys and I should say, we discuss a lot about overwhelm and just
yeah,
feeling like there's so much to think about in terms of health and well-being and like every aspect. And sometimes it just feels so overwhelming that you just want to throw your hands in the air
yeah,
and walk away, right? Because
yeah.
like, what's the point? But I've said this for years on my social media. I actually think it was at one point in my profile, which is small steps are still steps.
Yes,
And I think that it is so important to really not just hear it, but believe it. Like
yes.
believe that one step is still a step. And then
Mm,
also you said that that it's not a one size fits all. And so what
mm,
your neighbor or your friends or your, sister or brother and their kids are doing, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're doing. And that's
no,
really
exactly.
important. Wouldn't you
Exactly.
say?
So,
Yeah.
and of course, the irony is that we compare our parenting to other parents on social media.
Yep.
So it just reinforces that, like, I'm not doing what the Smiths are doing, and therefore I'm a bad parent. But, and I always joke, like, if your kid has said you're the worst parent in the world, welcome to the club. The membership is large, right? Like, it's normal for children to not like us setting limits, to say no to something. But we are actually, that's protective. We're
Yeah.
actually helping them grow up to deal with disappointment and frustration. And I'm talking, you know, little s struggle, not capital T trauma. But I think we can't underestimate what an important role we play. And whether that first step is with your child or with your parent partner or your spouse or your child's school, it might even be a question, not a solution first. It just might be, what are we doing now that could be different? What is working? What is not working? What do
Yeah.
we miss about those COVID days or pre COVID days, right? Just the conversation first.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I feel like this whole approach screams intentional, right? Which is
Yay!
like
Yay!
just it is. And you guys, that is really her coined term. I mean, she's not about demonizing technology. And because technology can be so helpful, as I said in the beginning, but it really is about being tech intentional and being able to use these things in a way that don't corrupt and take over our whole lives, whether you're an adult, whether you're a parent, whether you're a child, and, and so forth. I mean, this is so applicable. You don't have to be a parent
No.
to have takeaways here as well. I mean, really, it's widespread. But your book, which I want to talk about really quickly, actually I had it right here, but the Screen Time Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech intentional family. I mean,
Yeah.
that to me is just like how could this not be helpful? How
Yeah.
could this not be? And I can only imagine what's in the book because we've covered a lot of stuff here, but I can't imagine that there's like not a million more tips and really, really helpful, tangible, things that you have to say about just like every sector of this.
Thank you. I've been working on it for a few years, different iterations over time. And actually, the pandemic helped me really reframe it in a good way. I'm really glad the way it came out. And I also really was intentional about calling it the screen time solution because so many books are about the problem. And it's like,
Mm.
the last chapter might be like, well, and here's what you can do about it. But each of my chapters has a little like TLDR at the end, which is like the highlights and some really practical strategies. I wrote it like I talk. And I realized when I sent it to the editor the first time, they were like, there are way too many italics and underlined words. And I was like, but that's how I speak. So I actually recorded the audiobook myself because I get to say all those things. So the audiobook's in production right now. It should be ready in June. But the actual paper version is available and the Kindle version is available as well. So
Perfect.
I know some people prefer audio and it is a great form of technology. So,
It is. It is. And you know what? A lot of people actually, I think some of the best way to read is actually to read and listen.
yes, it
I think
is.
that's
There's research
amazing.
for that too. Yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
First of all,
Mhm.
I just off the cuff, I have to say that you made me laugh. Also, people will be able to see this because this
Oh,
is also, yeah, this will go on
okay.
YouTube. So,
I'm not sure.
but no, you look great. You look great. But it is really funny because you said something about, uh, Oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
Like emphasizing
Oh,
my
emphasizing. Yeah,
yeah.
emphasizing. And I was thinking like that is so me. I write how I talk.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm like a big like underliner and bold and italic and all of
Yeah.
that. And I've always been that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I have written a lot. Not I don't just speak, but I was really into writing when I was younger and in college, and sort of like took it up very amateurish ish, if that's even
Yeah.
a word. But it's just so funny because I think that that's really special. And I think that it's, people like, at least me,
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. So I
Well,
can
and I wanted
imagine that
it to,
it's,
yeah, I wanted it to feel like I was just there talking with you.
yeah.
Again, the message of being non-judgmental, and I've had fun. It's funny what people like, what resonates. I've had a couple people come up and be like, I laughed out loud at a couple parts in your book, and it was not even intentional. There you go, there a word again. But yeah, I'm glad it's out there, and I'm glad I have it as a tool, because I think
Yeah.
it is, and it's a great starting point too. If parents just don't know where to begin, the idea is that you read it and you feel informed and empowered, not like overwhelmed by how hard everything is. It is hard, and I don't let us off the hook, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's meant to be a tool that's helpful.
Well, it sounds like I have not read the whole thing. I've read little excerpts, but
Yeah.
it sounds like an absolutely phenomenal tool and resource. And I just, yeah, I can't thank you enough for being here
Oh,
because, like I said, I just feel like this is such an important conversation to have when
yeah.
we're just talking about health and well-being. And then, families, I know that's your specialty, but, just in terms of like a broad
Yeah.
perspective here, how can we not touch on this subject when this is such a huge portion of life? And we
Yeah.
have to understand how to navigate it properly. So and you've had so
Thank
many good things to say. I feel like
you.
there's a million more questions I could probably ask you.
Yeah, I said I could talk about this for hours, but
I know. I
it is
know.
like, my mission is really to create a tech intentional movement, that
Yeah.
it's not just parents, it's all of us. That, like,
Yeah.
if we, for example, if we all just lived our lives out loud, that would change things a lot, right?
For
So
sure.
that's
Yeah.
everyone's homework assignment, is just slow
Everyone's homework.
down.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
be a little bit more intentional
there you
about
go.
how we communicate, right?
Yes, exactly.
Where can people find you? I know that you are on social
The
media and
irony, right? I know. I am on social media. I do have some assistants who help me, because I don't want to be on social media all the time. I probably post most in Instagram and LinkedIn, although I have Facebook and Twitter, and I think I have a YouTube channel as well, but it's tips about being tech intentional. So those are, I don't spend a whole lot of time there. So those are just more like libraries. And my blog, one thing I definitely recommend is to sign up for my mailing list. I do not spam you. I don't send you multiple emails. It's one weekly essay on some topic. And then that is usually what's current or what I'm hearing in the world. And I'll send like news roundup, like things that are happening in the news related to tech. I have a lot of blog posts with essays. I've mentioned a couple of today's interview about, making a fake Snapchat account is on there. So you can go back and look at some of the old posts. Um, yeah, so mailing list is a great one. And then I do speaking. I do come to schools. I can do virtual or in person. I love doing parent education events when, it's either a PTA or school counselor admin will bring me in. I'll be on the East Coast doing a talk in April. And so I love doing that. And then I also do one-on-one coaching with parents who really want to find the friction.
find the friction.
Yeah, and it's work, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
not a quick fix. It's
Yeah.
I actually, it's 8 sessions minimum, because it isn't a quick easy solution, and I want to work with you over time. So that's another way. And all this information is on my website, which is
Yes.
the screentimeconsultant.com.
Yes, perfect. And again, all of this will also be in the show notes. You guys know I'm extremely thorough with show notes, so don't ever skip over them. And all of this stuff, Emily's social media, her website, the how you can buy her book. I know it's available on Amazon and other where books are sold. Her offerings, if you're interested in having her come to a school, you can get all of this information off the show notes as well. It has been such a fun conversation and more importantly a very informational and helpful conversation. I have I think I have to think about some of it just in terms of my own life even though I'm not a parent. It's just been very very helpful and I know that this is going to be helpful for families and for parents who are listening. So Uh,
Well, thank you.
yes, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's really been a pleasure.
It's an honor and a privilege, and you're a great interviewer. I felt like this was a very easy conversation, so I always
Oh,
appreciate that when you
oh,
did a little bit of homework, but like it was just free flowing and comfortable. So
I
thank you very
appreciate
much.
that.
Yeah,
Thank you. That means a
sounds
lot. I
good.
really appreciate that so much. Well, I will talk to you soon. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you again for all of your wisdom.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.